My name is Lisa, and like a huge number of people in the United States, I am a very Catholic person. I've been going to church since I was very young, and I can't remember the last Sunday I didn't go to. There were many moments in my life where my belief was tested, even moments where I told myself that nothing was real. But none of these moments tested my faith. They just taught me that just as there is something up there watching over us, there are also cruel and merciless beings who want to drag us down to hell with them. It all started one tragic day when I lost my husband and children in a train accident. Depression took hold of me. My heart was filled with doubts, and none of my friends could lift me. The only thing that remained sacred to me was church, and over time, Father Thomas became the only person I listened to. Father Thomas was a man of faith, a good and generous man who always wanted the best for all those who attended the church. He was also a person of wisdom. It was as if his advice brought my soul back to life. I had no interest in him as a woman, and he had no interest in me. Not in that way. To me, he was a guide. I quickly became obsessed with that church. My friends would tell me that I spent too much time there and that I did nothing but talk about the church or Father Thomas. Part of me thought they were jealous, but I lied to myself. They knew they were right. I just didn't care. I only cared about spending time at the church. As time went on, I realized that Father Thomas was behaving much more strangely than I thought. Every time I went to pick him up, he would come to me. At first, I thought it was a gesture of kindness, but as time went on, I realized that he didn't want me to come into his office. At the time, I thought it was probably for something good, something beyond my comprehension that Thomas didn't want me to get involved with. I thought I didn't have to distrust him no matter what, but after what happened a few days later, I realized that there was a big difference between being devoted and being innocent. Lisa, my daughter, yesterday I noticed that you were spying on me coming into my office. Is there something bothering you? As always, Father Thomas was very attentive, but at the same time imposing.
Oh, I'm sorry. I must admit that I'm a very curious person, and I always wanted to see your office. It won't happen again.
You must be careful with curiosity, child, since that's the way the devil usually separates the sheep from the flock.
Yes, I'm sorry, Father.
Don't worry, Lisa. You know what? I can show you my office if you come tonight. You've proven you're a child of God several times, and I'm sure you're ready to know a little bit more about this church and what its walls hide.
Oh, you think so? I don't want to be invasive.
No one is invasive in God's house, Lisa. See you tonight. Excited, I continued with the Mass that Sunday, and in the evening, after lunch, I went into the church. I was afraid it might be a little late, but Father Thomas was there, waiting for me as always with a huge smile on his face. He pointed me in the direction of his office as if he didn't know it. All the way, we walked in silence. Thomas was still with a huge smile, but I felt very uncomfortable. I felt something was wrong, but I refused to follow my instincts. I was in God's house, after all. When we arrived at the office, I entered with great curiosity, and when the door closed, I thought Thomas had come in with me, but to my surprise, I was alone.
Father?
With no answer, I began to examine the office. It seemed totally normal. There was nothing about it that caught my attention, except for one thing. On one side, there was a huge, terrifying painting. I never liked horror movies, but even so, I knew where it was from.
This painting is from that movie. Was it The Nun? What is it doing here?
The picture was terrifying. It seemed that the pale and terrifying nun was looking back at me. I stopped looking at it and headed for the exit, but from 1 second to the next, the lights went out and then came back on. Terrified, my eyes darted around the office until I came across something I would not have liked to see.
No, this can't be possible. This can't be possible.
The nun's painting was still in front of me, but it was empty. The lights went out once more, but the light didn't come back on.
The light switch. It must be here somewhere. Here it is.
Did my eyes see what I saw? No, this has to be a mistake. I had to be hallucinating. I ran towards the exit door. I had to get out of there as soon as possible.
My body, it hurts.
As I looked up in the direction of the attacker, I saw not the nun, but Father Thomas with his characteristic smile.
Father, what is happening?
I warned you, Lisa. Curiosity is how the devil drives the sheep away from the flock.
Are you the devil?
No, Lisa. I'm just a man of faith, just like you. It's just that my faith is placed elsewhere.
What do you mean?
You see, Lisa, I'm not Father Thomas. Father Thomas suffered a small accident several years ago, and although it was very easy to take his place, no one ever met him. Very convenient that the people who knew him also had some accidents, wasn't it?
Why? Why are you doing this?
You see, I believe that the only God that is in contact with man is not up there, Lisa, but down below. I prefer to be devout to him.
What are you drawing on my head? My body hurts so much. I can't move.
I noticed. I think you have a broken leg. The nun has given you a real beating, but this is a good thing. With these marks, she will come looking for you for sure. You will be an excellent sacrifice, Lisa.
This cannot be happening. The nun is a fictional character. She's from a movie.
Yes, from a movie based on a true story, dummy. Didn't you know the Warrens really existed? Oh, she's close. Time to say goodbye, Lisa.
No!
Suddenly, I felt a cold sensation near me. I turned my head, and the nun was standing next to her painting, staring at me. Oh, look at her! Isn't she beautiful? Kill her, nun. This is my sacrifice to you. With these words said, the nun approached me, but suddenly her head turned away. What? No! Get away from me! Get her! The nun stepped in front of Thomas. While the fake father was frozen, unable to move, the nun embraced him and with impossible speed carried him out of the room. I still didn't understand what was happening, but I knew it was my chance to escape. With difficulty, I limped to the exit. That was the last day I went to that church. I never had much more detail about what I experienced that night or told anyone what happened. I am still very much a believer, but I'm less innocent now. That day, I realized that God's house may be sacred, but inside it, there may be unwanted guests. When I was 13, my parents moved to a pretty rural area. I'd lived in the Bay Area my whole life and was pretty used to the city, so moving out into what felt like the middle of nowhere was quite a switch for me. One day, I decided to go exploring the woods. My parents told me multiple times not to go out there alone, but at that point, I had to get out. It was a hot day, and about 15 minutes into my walk, I was sweating like a pig. Little deer trails were carved out in the brush, snake skins, and old tire swings someone had set up in one of the trees, and beer cans. I finally reached the top of the hill and found an old abandoned church. The place looked like it had not had anyone in it for decades. I reached the front of the church and stepped up onto the porch. A set of wooden double doors with silver crosses embedded in the front of them greeted me. I grabbed the rusted handles and pulled. The heavy doors swung open, and my nose was immediately assaulted by a terrible smell. The best way to describe it would be decay, the smell of rotting wood, and flesh mingled together with a musty weight and summer heat. At this point, I should have just walked back up the hill and headed for home. Instead, I decided to power through and check the place out. I grabbed my handkerchief out of my pocket and tied it around my face. A pile of animal carcasses was heaped in the corner. A constant sound of metal rubbing on stone could be heard from inside the church. Suddenly, I heard a humming chorus coming from a close distance. The singing continued for a bit, and then it stopped. After that, a booming male voice began to chant. I was already freaked out, but the voice thoroughly scared the hell out of me. I It sounded like some Old Testament preacher you see in the movies, but again, it was like he was speaking in a different language because I couldn't understand a single word. Eventually, it got to where the single male voice would say something, and then a bunch of voices would answer in song. This lasted for a while, and then they all broke into this long, sustained wail that kept getting louder. It got so loud and so disturbing that I covered my ears. Then it stopped. I peeked into the chapel and my stomach dropped. Inside the chapel, there stood a group of people wearing white cloaks, humming this weird tune all together. Maybe a dozen or so candles were placed on shelves lining the stone walls. On the altar in front of them laid down a dried human body. There was no doubt the corpse was months old. I couldn't tell if it was a woman or a man, but the sight gave me chills. I could tell the disciples of this abandoned church are the followers of the Dark Lord, or else why would they sing ominously in front of a dead body? 5 huge white goats were tied in the corner. One of the followers picked up a bowl from the altar and walked towards those goats. The bowl had some thick, darkish liquid in it, which seemed like blood to me. One by one, the man smeared the goat's white fur with that liquid. The poor animals bleated in fear. They could probably sense something bad was about to happen to them. Once the goats were marked with that suspicious liquid, another man picked up a huge scythe and started chanting in some weird language.
Sanguis bibimus corpus edibus! Sanguis bibimus corpus edibus!
The entire group then screamed,
Hail Satan! Hail the Dark Lord!
In front of my eyes, the man with the scythe slaughtered the goats one by one. The floor of the church drowned in blood. I was horrified by this scene. Suddenly, a voice spoke from behind.
Do you like what you see?
Turning around, I was face to face with this old woman on the floor. She only had her upper torso, balancing on her frail, skinny hands. I tried to answer, but my voice froze in my throat, and my instincts told me to try and run. Without a word, I broke into the fastest sprint I could muster. The woman chased me like some unknown creature. She was running on her hands, and damn, she was fast.
Stop! Don't be afraid! Join us! Whatever I did for him! He may have taken half of my body, but I still survived! Believe in his miracle! The Dark Lord taketh! The Dark Lord giveth! Stop, you foolish kid!
But I didn't flinch. Once I was past the gate, I turned around one last time and saw the woman panting and watching me with creepy eyes. She wasn't chasing me anymore. Wiping the sweat off her forehead, she said,
He will decide your fate.
I ran down the hill at some point. My sight went black as I slipped into unconsciousness. It was 2 days before I woke up in the hospital. My parents and the police questioned me endlessly, asking what had happened, and I told them the story I just told you. They, of course, didn't believe me, at least not the part about the thing I had encountered in the church basement. The police did go looking for the church and the woman I had described. They found the empty, abandoned church, nothing else. But the story doesn't end here. A week after this incident, when I was finally getting back to being normal, I saw that woman again. I was sitting in my backyard watching the sunset when I heard a chuckle nearby. I turned my head, and there she was, standing under a tree at some distance. Only she was different this time. She had a complete human body and looked strikingly young. She wore a red gown with her hair all curly and shiny. Her skin was pale, but all the wrinkles were gone. Her glassy blue eyes hardly blinked. She waved at me and said,
I told you, the Dark Lord taketh, the Dark Lord giveth. There's still time. Join us.
I screamed for my mom. Mom! Mom, she's here! She's back! In a wink, she was gone. I didn't know if she vanished or dissolved into the ground, but she was gone. It's been 15 years now. I don't understand how she regenerated her body and her age, but I pray I never see her again. No one believes a word I say regarding this, but my memory of the event will never change. The door is locked right now. I'm sitting here, all alone, and with nobody to help me, and I know my end is near. Still, I want as much of this information to be available to the public in case anyone ever comes looking for answers. I went to that town on a vacation as a tourist. I should have never visited that town, but it seemed quaint and quiet. The perfect place for a writer like me to get some peace and quiet and work on my latest book, or so I thought. The day I arrived, everything seemed to be perfect. It was a Saturday and I spent my time visiting the local shops and getting to know the people. The Sunday that followed was perfect as well. Nobody acted off, and everybody seemed to be genuinely happy. They all mulled through the streets, particularly the main street, and engaged with me, just as they did with the multitudes of other tourists who flocked to the town. It was Monday when I first noticed something strange. Sure, you expect the weekdays to be quieter, I thought, as I drove through town and stopped at a local diner on Main Street, but this was different. It was eerie, the way that all the shutters were down, and there wasn't a soul to be seen. I decided to ask the waitress about it. She was the first person I'd seen all day. Where is everyone?
Why, at the church, hon. Where else?
On Monday?
Oh, we practice a slightly different religion here. Why don't you head up and watch? You might convert, you know.
She grinned at me, her yellow and crooked teeth showing, and went back to wiping down the counter. I shuddered and decided to leave. I went back to my hotel and thought about what she said. I had always made it a point to study religion, and I had a great deal of respect for it, so I decided that maybe she was right. Maybe this would be interesting. I got in my car and drove down to the church. The sign outside read "Welcome" in big, friendly letters. I walked in, and the first thing that hit me was the smell. It was a mixture of blood and incense, and it made my stomach churn. I almost turned to leave, but something made me stay. I sat down in the first pew, trying to make my presence as unobtrusive as possible, and looked around. The altar was draped in a red cloth, and there were candles burning everywhere. On either side of the altar were two men, both clad in black robes. Their faces were hidden in the shadows, but they spoke in loud and booming voices.
We welcome you, O Lord, into our presence. Now, heal our sickly brother of his sins and his fleshly heirs.
And with that, a man walked forward, placing his head on the altar. The two men in the robes began to chant a sort of song, and I realized with a start that it was in Latin. As they chanted, they and the rest of the congregation began to file out of the church one by one. Turning to the woman next to me, I asked quietly what was going on.
God will heal him. He takes him away onto the next world to be full of good. Soon he will return, healed of his earthly ills.
She smiled at me and patted my hand before she too filed out of the church. I sat there, however, till nobody was left but the man who still had his head placed on the altar. And then I heard a noise. It was deathly silent, but it caused a wind to whip through the church and the candles to flicker out. I turned around and saw something standing next to me. It was tall, with wings, and its eyes were glowing red. It had a gigantic unhinged jaw and teeth of molten lava. It had the body of a human despite these deformities, and he was wearing some sort of torn robe. What was perhaps the worst thing about it, however, was the smell. It reeked of death and rotting flesh, and I had to fight the urge to vomit. The man raised his head from the altar, saw the beast, and screamed. But it was too late. It lunged towards him, knocking him to the floor. I stumbled to my feet, terror filling my body, and ran toward the door. As I did, however, I saw the creature raise its head from its feast and turn toward me. Its eyes, glowing red with hunger, locked onto mine, and it began to stalk toward me. I ran even faster out of the door and through the crowd that stood there.
Get away! It's coming for you!
But nobody listened. They just stared at me as if I was crazy and watched me get into my car. I looked toward the church door, half expecting the beast to be standing there, but it was empty. I drove away as fast as I could, not looking back till I was out of town. But it wasn't over for me. That's why I'm documenting this. The first hotel I stayed at seemed to be peaceful, and I had almost put the entire experience behind me. But as I sat in my room, my computer opened in front of me. I heard a soft flapping noise outside my window. I got up to close the curtains, but when I looked out, I saw the beast perched on the edge of the roof, its eyes glaring at me through the glass. I stumbled backward, tripping over a chair. In an instant, the creature had leapt from where it stood on the roof to the window of my room, its red eyes boring a hole in my mind. It stood there, staring at me, and I felt an immeasurable amount of hatred and rage directed at me. I had ruined its plan, its happy life which it had lived. I was a threat to it, and I had to be removed. Screaming, I called for management, which burst into my room seconds later. But then, however, the creature had gone, vanished into the night. I tried telling them what had happened, but the manager looked at me as if I was crazy. I know he thought I was insane, and even when I left the hotel the next morning, I know he was glad to have me gone. I'm writing this from a different hotel now, one in a different state. I don't know how long I can stay ahead of it, because I know it's been following me. It's intelligent. It knows I saw it, and it wants me dead. I can hear its wings above me even now, circling my room like a vulture. It follows me when I'm driving, just waiting till I'm alone to strike. I can't go on like this. I'm running out of money, and I'm running out of time. Soon it'll catch up to me. When it does, I'll be dead.